Welcome to the Tuesday Review. I'm Nathan.
I'm James.
And I'm Callum.
And tonight we are talking another Kevin Costner post-apocalyptic epic, The Postman.
Postman Pat. Postman Pat.
And his six-shot revolver.
It's Kevin Costner, so Postman Kev. Postman Kev.
And his black and white hat, whatever. I don't know. It's kind of grey.
He has a mule, but it's not black and white. Yeah, we thought we'd bang out the Kevin Costner mid-90s post-apocalyptic epic duo.
Duology.
Duology, yeah.
Callum and myself were picking our father up from work today, and we're talking about the show.
Yeah.
And we said we're talking about The Postman tonight. And he's like, oh, he's like movies so bad. I'm like, have you ever seen? He's like, no.
Yeah.
But it's like, that was his bad period. I'm like, that and Waterworld, they both sucked. I'm like, but no, they actually didn't.
This is exactly what we were talking about last week. And if you're listening to the show and you haven't listened to last week's episode, we talked about Waterworld, starring Kevin Costner, and how it did really poorly critically. It didn't do very well financially, and it got a reputation for being terrible. And so people who had never seen it just assumed it was really bad.
Like, our dad hasn't seen these movies.
Exactly.
And he was crapping all over them.
And as we talked about in last week with Waterworld, it's actually really good, and people should definitely take the time to revisit it. And The Postman, which came out 2 years after Waterworld, is the same thing. It's like people just assumed it was terrible. They've never seen it. It became a joke. So one of the reasons we're talking about it, not only is this episode a companion piece to last week's episode, but it's like, if you haven't seen these movies, you should check them out.
Yeah, why not?
And
they're really good.
Yeah, like the stigma surrounding them, the bad negative vibes surrounding them,
completely unfounded.
Exactly. And not always completely, like, you know...
Look, every movie has a couple of issues.
They have problems,
but...
and, you know, The Postman especially, I can maybe see at the time how some elements might not have worked, but, you know, 25 years later...
Holds up.
It's like, you know, we're not getting movies like this anymore,
No,
and this is some beautiful stuff. So... Last week we talked about Waterworld, which was released in 1995. The Postman came out 1997. So just 2 years later, Kevin Costner
brings us another 3-hour epic.
Coming off of Waterworld is like, I'm going to make another 3-hour post-apocalyptic epic. This time Kevin Costner directs the film. Obviously with Waterworld we talked about how he was kind of trying to control the project even though he wasn't the director. And this time he's like, well, he's going to work with his favourite actor and favourite director, being himself. And I guess, whereas Waterworld was very much like Mad Max on the water, this one, it's post-apocalyptic, but in a different way from most other post-apocalyptic movies.
It's sort of set far enough away from the post-apocalyptic event. It's like 15 years or something?
No, I disagree with everything you're saying just in that very short snippet of what you just said. So in most apocalyptic movies, it's about, you know, trying to survive and in this horrible, unlivable environment, and there are mutants and there are guys wearing spikes and everything's trying to kill you, and it's like a fantasy about just tearing everything down. Whereas The Postman is more about trying to rebuild society and get back to what made things great before the post-apocalyptic event.
Which is kind of what I was going to lead into. I was going to say that this is less than...
Yeah, but you were saying, because it's set 15 years after. No, I would disagree with that time
maybe
frame.
I phrased it badly, but it's set at a period after the post-apocalypse where things are somewhat settled and they're trying to work towards restoring...
But usually in a post-apocalyptic movie, that period would never end. You know, that destructive period, the longer it gets away from the initial post-apocalyptic event, the more people forget about what society used to be like. Whereas this is only set 15 years after, so there are people alive who very much remember and were part of society before the breakdown. So basically it's about Kevin Costner plays a drifter who, after 15 years after sort of nuclear war or some sort of World War III kind of event, the world's been destroyed, and it's about Kevin Costner's character trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic America.
I'm pretty sure nukes were involved.
Yeah. And he's sort of going from these little towns of survivors and just performing Shakespeare and performing shows, just basically a way to win a meal. And he gets kidnapped, isn't the right word.
He gets forcibly conscripted.
Yes, into a
mercenary army.
Yes, called the Holnists, who were... They're basically a militia of marauders who go from town to town and take...
In the book, they're referred to...
Yeah, so we're talking about the movie and not the book.
No, I mean,
like, the book's different.
For context, the group, it's the same in the book as it is in the film, but in the book, it's referred to as, like, a warlord. Yeah. So Bethlehem, the primary antagonist of the film, is referred to as a warlord instead of just, like, a leader. Yeah, so General Bethlehem, played by Will Patton, is the leader of the Holnists, and they believe in a sort of feudal system, a warlike system, and they basically go from town to town taking whatever they want, and they forcefully conscript Kevin Costner's character into their army, sort of force him to fight. He escapes, finds an old post van, and finds an old postman's uniform and some letters, and he what do you call it? Trick his way into getting a meal, getting shelter. He goes to the next town and says, well, actually the US government's restarted and they're starting the Postal Service. And that kind of lie ends up triggering a chain of events that brings hope back to...
It snowballs.
Yeah, into a sort of... it's like a movement of people trying to restart the Postal Service across this post-apocalyptic wasteland.
And, of course, the Postal Service represents organisation in disunity.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about the mail, it's about...
It literally is about the mail. But it's important so that in the context... It sounds ridiculous when you talk about it.
In the context of the movie, it's about restoring...
It's symbolism.
Yeah, restoring how things used to be, restoring order to the chaos.
But one of the ways it's also different from a lot of post-apocalyptic movies is the sort of the land... It's not necessarily a wasteland. Like,
that's the thing. We'll talk about that later when we talk about like the visuals of the movie. But yeah, like it's not like Mad Max in the context of it.
It's society has broken down.
Yeah,
you know, it's the libertarian ideal.
Of free enterprise.
There's no centralized government.
Yeah.
Very little centralized government. Yeah. I know that sounds... It's an anarchist's ideal.
Yeah.
When you put it that way.
Yeah.
It was just interesting to see a post-apocalyptic movie where it's not just all irradiated.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the breakdown of the world as it is the breakdown of social structures.
Yeah. Exactly. So the movie didn't do well critically or financially.
People just hate on Kev.
Yeah, but like Waterworld made most of its money back and did pretty well on VHS. This movie was made with a budget of about $80 million and grossed about $17 million.
Oof.
So no one saw this movie.
Did Costner finance it himself, partially?
No.
Because I know he put a lot of his own money into Waterworld.
Yeah, but that was out of necessity because they kept going over time and over budget. Whereas this movie, as far as I know, the production wasn't that disastrous.
Well, that's good, I guess.
But yeah, it also came out the same year as Titanic. So, like, no one cared about this movie. I guess the negative press from Waterworld also meant that this movie, people who didn't like Waterworld were probably not going to waste their time on The Postman. And whereas the Waterworld sort of had maybe mixed to negative reviews, Postman just had mostly negative reviews. People...
I guess you could see they received hate mail.
Stephen Holden of the New York Times criticized the movie for its bogus sentimentality and mawkish jingoism.
I don't really agree too much.
I agree, but I don't think they're bad. And we'll talk about the cheese later on because there's some good cheese.
How can you criticize sentimentality in a film? I mean, don't get me wrong, you can't go overboard, but I don't feel they went too overboard with it in The Postman.
We'll talk about that soon, but it's like, whereas Waterworld might be like 20% cheese, this movie's like 85% cheese. And that's, for me and for us, I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I feel like it works for this movie.
Perhaps for audiences and critics at the time, they were probably just not having any of it. Roger Ebert described The Postman as good-hearted yet goofy and pretentious. However, Ebert recognized the movie as a failed parable for which he said the reviewers shouldn't blame them for trying. And we'll talk about that later. I feel like even if you don't like this movie, it's like they tried really hard to bring a message of hope, and technically the movie is fantastic, just visually and the way it's put together. So, like, it's not a bad movie at all. It has problems, but it's not the disaster that even people who haven't seen it, think it is. There's even that Simpsons joke where Lisa's watching The Postman and there's like director's commentary and it's Kevin Costner just being like, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I am so sorry. So like, that's the thing. Like with Waterworld, there was this negative cloud hanging over it for the last 20 years. And so that's all people knew about it, was that it wasn't good.
It's the movie people joke about.
Exactly.
It's not even that bad.
And it's not even that bad.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, and it's good.
And as far as you saying the jingoism and all of the other sort of themes in the movie, like, they suited the film for me. Like, if you think about it, it's been 15 years. There are still people, a lot of, the adults in the movie were alive for society, like, before society broke down.
Yeah.
They have that sort of almost rose-tinted glass, especially when hope is concerned.
And we'll talk about that now. So I guess we'll mention we're going to do full spoilers. But yeah, like with this movie, The Postman isn't as good as Waterworld. Waterworld is, even the theatrical version of Waterworld, I think, is a better movie. But The Postman's still enjoyable. So, like, just because you heard it was the worst movie ever or whatever,
it's good
worth
because
checking
it
out.
features a unique perspective on the genre.
That's another thing. Yeah, it's like, it's not just a Mad Max ripoff. Like Waterworld, it has that element of it's Mad Max on water. Whereas this one, it's like, yeah, it's post-apocalyptic movie, but it's not just...
It's almost as much a Western as it is a post-apocalyptic movie. Like, not that they can't coexist.
Yeah. Well, we talked about how Waterworld, even though it was set on the ocean and it was like kind of like a pirate movie, it definitely had Western vibes. Whereas The Postman is like...
More literally Western.
More like a neo-Western, yeah. So, yeah, we'll do full spoilers for The Postman. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's pretty cool. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode about Waterworld, check that out first, because this is a companion to that. And watch Waterworld as well. So, yeah, like, I think maybe people's problem... One, it's 3 hours long.
Which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, but for people who don't like cinema, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think the movie's also a drama, not an action adventure. Like, Waterworld is a long movie, but it's action-packed. There are long stretches of just characters talking and traveling and whatever. Whereas Postman is definitely more of a drama. Like, it's more about the traveling and the rebuilding of society.
There's, from like a story, from a person who enjoys a good story, there's a lot of nice world building in this movie that I appreciated. Like,
and character building.
And character growth and all that kind of good stuff. But like you were saying before, I want to go back to it, like how people didn't like the sort of jingoism and the cheese. I'm like, but from a certain thematic and storytelling angle, it makes sense.
Well, I mean, maybe we'll talk about that first instead of later, is that the movie sort of, because it's about the survivors trying to restart the government and try to restart, America the way it used to be. That sounds very lame. That sounds really like rose-tinted glasses, like you were saying. But it works in the context of the movie. It's also a movie, so the imaginary version of the America before the apocalypse.
It's technically about America because they have the American flags and so on and so forth, but it's not even about America as it is Western, like not even Western, just society as a general idea.
That's what I've always like a lot of people, who don't like, I don't like American sort of uber patriotism,
the nationalistic mindset.
And jingoism. I don't like that either. But I love American jingoistic movies because, like Callum was saying, it's not necessarily about America being the greatest country in the world, even though that's maybe what the filmmakers were going for. It's more about like the ideals that America is supposed to stand for. So
Like-
it's about hope, it's about justice.
In the context of the film,
Yeah.
restoring America means literally providing communication channels to all the towns
Yeah.
so they can talk to their relatives
Yeah,
or
exactly.
whatever.
It's got
And
nothing to do with the United States of America.
That
It's just
also
got to do with
Yeah.
connecting.
Yeah.
the dots.
And bringing order back to the chaos. It's not necessarily about instituting.
Federal government.
Because the
Like,
flag,
I mean, it
yeah,
is, but
the
it's not.
flag,
Yeah, but it's not necessarily saying, well, we're going to just make everything the way it was before
Yeah.
the apocalypse. It's like we just have to sort of get some sense of normal routine back in our
yeah,
lives.
the flag, the American flag, literally represents what was lost. In
Yeah.
the sense of the mail service, literally in this film, and stuff like that.
And David Brin, who wrote the novel that the movie's based on, he said, like, it's not about surviving the apocalypse. It's about, like, if the world ended, you'd miss little things like getting mail.
And we talked about that the other day.
Yeah.
And we buy things on the internet.
Yeah.
And you were saying that every time you get something from in the mail, it's like Christmas.
It's like Christmas. And because I order so much stuff, I never remember what I got. So it's always like a surprise.
Yeah.
I'm just like, yes, and I like rip it open.
Yes, a $2 Chinese cable.
Yeah, and it's
from
like if I bought it from China, it
eBay.
took so long to get here that I forgot I ordered it. And you open it and you're like, yes, cheap USB-C cable I ordered months ago that I forgot about. Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like you put yourself in these people's shoes. They're
Yeah.
struggling. They're getting on with their post-apocalyptic existence.
Yeah.
And it's like
They-
the idea that they could get mail from a relative they thought
Yeah.
was dead.
It's
It's like
they're worrying about if they have clean drinking water and enough food to survive. It's like to simply receive a letter from a loved one who they thought was dead is like the biggest luxury in the world, and that's where the sentimentality and that kind of emotional aspect I think really works in the film. And I think people at the time probably were just like, oh, this is silly.
I mean, in terms of like the cheese, the postman represents an independent, trusted figure. So it doesn't matter what clan you come from, what town you come from.
Yeah.
You can give the postman your letter, and he will deliver.
And
it.
he'll make sure
So
to
there's
deliver it.
they're an independent faction, which
Yeah.
is what the government was supposed to be in the context of the film.
Yeah.
So even though there's warlords running around,
Yeah.
the postman will deliver your mail,
Yeah.
regardless of where he's going or where he's been.
Exactly. It becomes this institution of like people who will die to uphold your voice.
Yeah,
if that
exactly.
makes sense. And I think like Kevin Costner's someone who goes for the big emotions in his movies. Like I think some people can be adverse to that. Like, it's not subtle at all. It's
Yeah.
it's very big.
Yeah.
It's very like either you're laughing or you're crying, there's no sort of, oh, this is a complex, emotion. It's like, oh, this scene's really funny. Oh, this scene's really about, America, like gung-ho, like, yeah. It's like, it's never like really that complex. But I think like watching the movie and it being like 3 hours long and dealing with, a lot of the world building and stuff, it's like there's a lot of interesting things to pick apart. And I was saying, watching the movie, I'm like, I would like this movie to be 4 hours long.
Well, there's
still a lot of stuff that's not explored.
There's still a lot of meat on the bones.
Yeah.
Because you only see the state of Oregon. Is that correct?
I think so. It takes
So,
place mostly in Oregon.
There's
yeah.
still 50 other states.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you can't fit all 50 states into a film, but
Yeah.
there's other questions. Like, for example, are there remains of the original government? We don't know. It's hinted that there's not,
Yeah.
but we don't know.
Yeah.
Are there other warlord tribes out there? Because we only see...
Probably.
what are they? The
Holnists.
Holnists.
Yeah.
So there's other questions they could have... Like, for example, this would be great if adapted well into a long-form miniseries.
Yeah, miniseries would be good. But alternatively, I think, people at the time didn't like it because it was so long. Whereas
But they're wrong.
Well, they're wrong, but also like I was saying, like the movie could be even longer to explain more things, and to also because the movie takes place over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And there are parts where even in a 3-hour movie, I was like, it feels like it's moving too quickly for the amount of
Yeah.
time. It takes place over several months.
I think the only the only fault, the only obvious fault I found with the film is the pacing isn't very good in certain areas.
Yeah, some areas.
Some areas the pacing's fine.
Yeah.
But then it'll feel like a lot's happened, and then it's only been like a month.
That's why the movie could be even longer to stretch out that. But alternatively, on the other hand, you could definitely cut this movie down to shorter and just focus on more like certain things. A thing I like about the movie is that even though it's kind of like a loose adaptation of the book, which I haven't read, but just from what I've understand of what the book's about, the movie feels like a book in that it has like not chapters, but like, you know, sections of the movie that focus on different things. So like the first, I don't know, third of the movie, maybe quarter of the movie is like the postman getting
the arcs are clearly defined.
Yeah, he's getting forced into joining this clan of, you know, this militia, the Holnists, who their leader Nathan Holm was sort of this what do you call it, like a dictator, like a
depending on who you ask, he's either like a criminal or a prophet.
Objectively, he was this, you know, general who
started the whole
I don't know if he started,
they call it clan.
Yeah, I don't know if he started the apocalypse, but he was definitely part of the uprising that led to the destruction of the government, and so that's why they're called the Holnists, and they rule themselves, like I said, under like a feudal system. They have the law of 8, is that what they call it?
Yep.
Which and that stuff,
tattoo.
Yeah, and that stuff's all really cool. I would like to see that explored even more. But that's the first part of the movie, and then the postman escapes, and you know, then the middle part of the movie is him pretending to be the postman, just basically to survive and to trick people, and then he kind of goes off, and there's like a small sort of quote unquote romantic section where he's injured and he's holed up in a cabin with the female lead.
But it's not that. See, that part for me didn't work as well. Like I feel like the romantic. It wasn't very romantic.
True, but I think it works in the context of when he's been away for
it works in the movie,
amount of months.
It's just like if they're trying to play the romance angle, it fails.
Yeah, that's probably one of the things people really didn't like about the movie, and that's probably where some of the movie actually does suffer. But the good thing about that scene is then he comes back after a few months and he realizes that his ruse has evolved into a legitimate movement of like young people who were born just before or after the apocalypse, who don't really know the world before, who are sort of instilled with this sense of hope and sort of take on the legacy of the postman and have started their
delivering
own postal service.
They become couriers.
Yeah, and they end up connecting all these small communities, which is really interesting. And the postman, who's never given a name,
like the mariner.
Yeah, kind of like the mariner.
Except,
but he kind of starts off as selfish, trying to survive, and he sort of ends up realizing, you know what?
You know who he is?
Who?
He's Western Han Solo.
Sort of, yeah.
Better Star Wars movie than Last Jedi.
Well, we'll talk about that later. I got notes. I got notes, my friend. I got notes. Remind me before we end the show. I got notes. But yeah, he changes from being selfish to selfless, and sort of the movement ends up at the end of the movie. It ends up connecting everyone, and they end up defeating the Holnists, and you know, it jumps ahead, a few decades, and it's like society has sort of returned to normal.
And they celebrate the postman.
Yeah, and they build a statue.
In a very cheesy way, his ruse ended up inspiring hope in him.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Like in the mega cheese.
Yeah, his cynical ruse is what ends up
changing him into a more hopeful.
Exactly. And making the world a better place.
Before we stop talking,
it's beautiful.
Before we stop talking about cheese,
yeah,
can we talk about that one really cheesy scene?
I got some notes about cheese.
Oh, good. Okay.
We got some.
I just want to make sure we talk about that one really cheesy scene.
The horse scene?
Yeah.
So this is probably my favorite scene in the movie because it is like a mountain of cheese, and this is probably what people at the time hated. But for me, it is like the pinnacle
peak Spielbergian cheese.
It's Spielberg. Like, if Spielberg did this scene, it would be exactly the same, but people would love it. But because it's Kevin Costner and he's coming off the Waterworld, people are just like, oh, this is so...
it's icky.
It's so good. So there's this bit in probably the maybe towards the end of the movie, middle of the movie, where the postman's riding his horse, delivering the mail from town to town, whatever, and he rides past a little boy who's waiting on the road.
And he's so excited.
With his letter. And the little boy is so excited to give his letter to the postman. But the postman's going so fast on his horse that he just rockets past the kid, and the kid's like gets really disappointed.
Yeah, overshoots.
And we get slow-mo.
And then Kevin Costner realizes what he's done, slows down the horse, and in like really dodgy slow-mo, turns around and starts galloping towards the kid.
Or is it genius?
That's kind of, it's like if it's already peak cheese, that dodgy slow-mo maybe makes it even more better cheese. I don't know. I've always every time I see that like janky slow-mo, it always throws me off, even if it's like adds to the goodness of the cheese. But basically he comes back around, starts riding towards the kid, and the kid like holds up his letter, and the postman bends down off his horse and grabs the letter and rides off. And it's like beautiful.
The kid continues to look after the postman, and the kid's like
changed
super his
happy.
life.
Yes. And then
at the end of the movie,
they reveal the postman statue, which is to commemorate this man who helped bring the world back to normalcy and order. And they pull down the thing, and it's like a statue of him riding the horse, giving the boy the letter. It's beautiful. Brings a tear to my eye. Yeah. And probably people were just like, ugh. But I'm just like loving it. I'm just like pumping my fists in the air.
Yeah.
And that kind of like, it comes with the
Postal Service.
Yeah, it comes with the whole like jingoistic kind of like, they're trying to restart the government or whatever. And it's kind of like, but it's that sense of hope, that movies, like these kind of movies, post-apocalyptic movies usually lack that, because it's usually at the end they're still in the post-apocalypse,
and it's such a depressing place to live.
And it's like at the end of most post-apocalyptic movies, it's like they're still in the post-apocalypse, they're still struggling to survive. They may have survived the situation in the movie, but it's still a dire situation. Like, there's very few post-apocalyptic movies where it's like, we want to try to get back to how it was.
It's all right at the end.
And at the end, they actually do it, which is really interesting.
At least partially.
From what we see, at least in that part
it's a much better environment.
It's all localized to the US, and we don't really see what happens to the rest of the world. But like we were saying before, it's like, it's not even just about America. It's like, if you can, they do a lot of literal flag waving, but it's like, if you can see past that.
Yeah, the flag's just a symbol. Don't worry about the country.
Even if Kevin Costner was definitely trying to instill that sense of American patriotism, even if he was trying to say America rocks, you can sort of interpret it in your own way.
Look, we're fancy, educated postmodernists.
That's why...
So we don't have to worry about the American flag.
That's why, I love, Captain America. I love Superman, because even though people might think, they're dull and they're, he's a Boy Scout, whatever, I'm like, but that's what's great about those characters, is like they're truth, justice, and the American way. It's not a really...
It's
America...
it's the distilled ideal of that specific democracy.
Yes, it's not what America actually is. It's what it wants...
Well, it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And that's what is sort of hopeful about it, and that's what's beautiful about it. In the real
world, when someone waves a flag, they're thinking about their own personal interpretation of what that flag stands for. But in this movie... And in the Superman comics and the Captain America comics, that flag represents the objective guidelines of that democracy. So in America, it's freedom, blah, blah, blah.
In real life, we're having a lot of problems now with nationalism and racism and etc. I think politically this movie is more relevant now than it was in the mid-90s.
I mean, I have some notes about that too.
Oh, you want to start or you want me
I'll
to start?
that off.
All right.
So in this movie, we see the bad guys, the Holnists, they're racists.
Yes.
They only want pure
racial, ethnic purity.
They want ethnic purity in their ranks.
Whatever that's supposed to mean.
But they're also a little bit hypocritical because they take one, I would say,
Negro.
unit of a man who's not.
Yeah, but I think the captain says like something like the general doesn't see it. But, you know, you've got, you know, so
We made the joke that it's really nice that the captain doesn't see race.
Yeah, he's actually not racist at all.
And like, there's like slaves, you know, the army has slaves and they're racists. And, you know, they attack the press in this movie.
Yeah.
And the bad guy, he uses this term in the movie. He wants to make America strong again.
Does he say that?
He does.
Oh, wow.
I made a note. He's like, I'm going to make America strong again. It's weak and all this sort of. So he goes on tangents about how the country's weak and to be strong, he's going to make America strong again through, you know, violence and whatnot.
Yeah.
But all of these sort of political messages, they're more relevant today than...
Exactly. And I think what's great about this movie, even though it might be simplistic, is that the bad guys are American nationalists, are racists, are, you know, trying to turn America into some sort of feudal system, and the good guys are trying to return America to some sort of the ideals which it was originally supposed to be founded on.
Nationalists today, in an American context, you every now and again you hear someone say, "Why can't I be like it was in the 50s?" That's like a common sentiment.
And in in their mind, that 50s never actually existed.
Yeah,
that version.
So, like this, it's a similar type of jingoism to that idea of always be the 50s again, when it was a more conservative era. You know, there was segregation, violence, so on and so forth. But that's what the wholeness represent. This idea of a return to a more violent, more racially based system of identification, whereas the postmen, if you want to call it the post people, represent the ideal.
Yeah, exactly. So even though the postmen are saying, well, you know, we want to restart the government, whatever, it's like they're not actually saying we want it to be like it used to be. They're saying, we want it to be like the ideals that we used to believe in. Yes. And it's... I don't want to get into Star Wars now because we'll end up taking up the whole show. But I'll mention that, you know, the author. I think it was the author of the original novel. You know, he said that restarting, you know, the government and the world it's about restoring the world to decency and justice and hope. And I think a lot of movies, probably in the 90s. Most of them had a sort of hopeful message, whereas now I'm not sure if they do. I don't know.
We're in a pretty gritty era for film.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe at the time when people saw this movie, they were just like, "Oh, this is rubbish. You know, this is sentimental and just jingoistic." And you know, there's you know, the 90s was a great era for film, so there was probably a lot of other great movies coming out, and they're just like, this is crap. Whereas now, it's like this movie, just in terms of the themes and that kind of hopeful message, you know, we were talking about, it kind of stands out. And it's different.
They don't make them like that anymore.
And then I guess we didn't have any talking about the technical aspect. The movie looks fantastic. The locations,
I was going to say the locations and the set design. My goodness.
Yeah, like there's you know, these, you know, canyons and valleys and
the
mountains.
Nature shots,
and it's like, you know, beautiful. It's location shoots that we don't even see anymore in movies.
I mean, let alone in post-apocalyptic films. Like we mentioned earlier, in most post-apocalyptic movies, it's all wasteland.
Yeah.
But in this film, you have like lush valleys and running rivers.
I think what Nathan was trying to say before is like the kind of nuclear winter that they reference in the movie has passed.
Yeah.
And now the environment part of the apocalypse has corrected itself. Like the environment's okay. It's just the people that are left. There's no government. There's no cities. Like it's just people who build townships and try to survive. So that's the apocalypse part. Even like the clothes and stuff, they're shabby and made of rags and stuff, but it's not like Mad Max Waterworld kind of like metal and spiky.
It's still clothing.
Yeah, and even the townships they build are like either built from older actual pre-existing towns or are just like wooden cabins and stuff like that. So it's definitely like a Western. There's a lot of like greenery. It doesn't feel like your other post-apocalyptic movies and games and so on.
Back to what you were saying, or didn't really want to say because it takes too much time. This is like a better Star Wars movie.
Oh, you want to get? Hang on, I got a couple. You know what I'll do? We'll leave Star Wars for last. What I'll do, I'll go through my notes. I'll just talk about all the things I haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, let's bang them off.
And then we'll just go full Star Wars for the end of the show. So yeah. I like how the movie takes place in the far-off future of 2013.
I know.
Also, just quickly, a quick shout-out to the theatre performance with the mule.
Oh, that was
good. Which is really cool.
Yeah, and he goes into the town and does Shakespeare with the mule.
The mule plays a part with the sword and everything.
Carries the sword in his mouth.
Thoroughly entertained.
Yeah, that was really good.
I like how the...
Bill?
Yeah, Bill the mule. I like how the Holnists are these, gruff military, militia guys, and all they want to watch is Sound of Music. Like they have this old film reel that they play.
Because all they know is violence.
Exactly. It's like, it's a change of pace. But also, like that quarry or that kind of...
so cool.
It's so crazy location, like amazing. And all the extras and stuff in this movie.
Like we say all the time, like we said in Waterworld, rather.
Yeah.
This movie made today would be mostly CG.
Yeah.
Or at least part, like 50% CG.
It'll be a lot, yeah. And the locations would be not as sort of beautiful in their scope and there's the bit at the end where there's at least 100, maybe more people on horseback.
Yeah.
Riding. It was quite a lot of people.
Would have been more than 100.
Yeah, and you got all these extras and all these horses, and it's crazy.
Like we said at the time, you wouldn't see that until Lord of the Rings later.
But even then, that was like there was a lot of practical horsemen and horses, but a lot of it, because of the amount of soldiers they needed, a lot of it was then augmented with CGI.
Yeah.
Whereas like this, obviously, there's less of the amount of people, but it's like all of them are all of them are there, all of them are real. Then there was like Bridge City, the dam.
Tom Petty
rocks up, which we'll talk about. But we saw it's like this huge dam, and then there's like shacks and houses built on the side of the dam, like for real. And it's like that's crazy. You never see that anymore. Yeah, but then the postman rocks up at Bridge City, and the mayor of Bridge City comes down and is like, well, what's up? And the postman's like, I know you, you're famous. And Tom Petty's like, I used to be. I'm like, what? Like, why is Tom Petty in this movie? It's awesome.
Why wouldn't?
Yeah,
why not?
Like, it's so good. There's like a real lion in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, movies don't make movies like this anymore. And this is the 90s. Like, it's not that long ago. Like, this was like the last great era before CGI ruined everything, before Disney owned everything, before PG-13 truly nerfed all films. This was like the last great era for like epic movies. I like the postman's oath that he gives to Ford, the character who really believes in the postman. And at this point, the postman like doesn't believe in anything he's doing. He's doing it to get fed, basically. But the character Ford, he's like, he really believes in the idea of the post service coming back. And so he swears him in with the oath that's written on the
and he keeps
the post office.
Glancing to read it.
Yeah, and he keeps trying to read it. This movie's pretty funny.
It's very cheesy.
Yeah. But then later when you find out that that Ford has like actually started the postman service by himself, like away from Kevin Costner's character, and he keeps changing the postman's oath. Like it gets more and more like post-apocalyptic and more relevant to what's happening as they fight against the Holnists. Yeah, what else?
The romantic subplot is a bit creepy in this movie for me. Somewhat.
Yeah, so this is one of the legit sort of complaints that probably people had at the time, and we have as well, is that when Kevin Costner's character comes to the first town, of course, same with Waterworld when he gets to the first town.
Contractually obligated.
Yeah, I'm sure Kevin Costner had this added to the script. But basically, like, a woman, Abby, she comes to him and is like, me and my husband can't have children. You're a healthy man from outside the community. Can you get me pregnant, please? And he's like,
There's a fair bit of cucking involved in this movie.
And the husband's like, I'm up for it. And
Kevin Costner's like,
all
right.
And then later he's just like, well, okay. And it's not really necessary, because you can still all you have to do to change it is basically he comes to the town, Abby and her husband are friendly towards the postman, so there's a sort of friendship that builds. Then later, when Abby's husband gets killed and the postman and her shack up in the cabin, it's like then they kind of fall in love because of their...
That'd make a bit of story. Like, this sort of just reeks of...
In terms of the creepy insemination plot, why not just have her lie and be like, oh, I like you, and then seduce him? You don't have to bring the husband into it until later where it can turn out to be a ruse.
That would have been better as well, actually.
They overcomplicate it.
Or as Callum and I were talking about it when we were watching the movie, it's like with Waterworld, it's an interesting post-apocalyptic trope of like trying to get a pure...
someone who hasn't had like the diseases that are common in
it's like and trying to prevent incest and inbreeding and trying to sort of prevent sickness and disease because there's only a certain amount of people left and most of the people alive probably aren't suitable, so to continue the race on, so it's part of the post-apocalyptic genre. So it's not out of place.
No, it's not out of place. But the way they went about it,
it's a bit creepy. There's a lot of creepy stuff in the movie. But still, like that doesn't ruin the whole movie.
No, definitely not.
Like I'm sure there are people who would watch it and be like, "This movie is the worst movie ever made," and it's like, well,
see, the thing is, in Waterworld, it was like mentioned once and then forgotten.
Yeah. Whereas this is like it's a plot point and it's like the basis of the relationship between...
I don't think anyone was like, oh, that's upsetting in Waterworld because it's just like, oh, well, that's a one-off line. Yeah. It's done. But they really focus on it in this film.
The rope bridge. When has the last time have you seen an actual rope bridge sequence in a movie? Like a practical rope bridge where someone falls off into a running rapid river. I haven't seen that in decades.
I think there's a rope bridge in the Magician's TV show.
But was it practical and did someone fall off it from a great height?
It was practical, but no one fell.
Yeah. So I'm sure there might have been a green screen underneath.
Exactly. See, so I'm talking about an actual legit like rope bridge sequence, like Indiana Jones Temple of Doom levels of crazy. You don't see that anymore. The Hannibal at the gate scene where the Holnists come to attack a town. And they refuse because of the hope that the Post Service has instilled in them. They refuse to open, and then so the Holnists attack. That was a great scene. The action in this movie is good, even though it's a drama first. Like the action,
real good Western drama.
Yeah,
like the shootouts and so on.
Yeah, Western action, like proper practical explosions and gunfights, and
you don't see that anymore.
Exactly. I also like how the movie ends with single combat. It's about...
Like honourable combat.
Yeah, it's about the postman fighting General Bethlehem, the leader of the Holnist, because in their Law of 8... is it Law 7?
Law 7.
It's one of their laws, yeah.
Anyone may
challenge for leadership. And so because the postman was technically part of the Holnists at one point, he can challenge for leadership. And it doesn't end with this huge battle, it ends with him...
One of the other, I guess... cheesy disappointments in this movie, and it's just a small one, is the fact that Bethlehem didn't recognize the postman because he shaved his beard.
Yeah, that was dumb. Yeah, we're not saying there isn't dumb stuff in the movie. The movie's dumb at times. I think is it?
It's a very innocent film in that way.
like David Brin, the author of the book, said he liked the movie, he liked what they did with it, but he's like, it's a dumb version of the book. And he's like, but the good thing about it is that it has heart.
Yeah.
And it wears its emotions on a sleeve.
It's kind of innocent.
Yeah, and I think that's what I like about the movie. It's kind of you can, like Roger Ebert said, you can tell they tried. You can't fault them for that.
The good guys are good and the bad guys are bad, and that's
it might
complicated as it needs to be.
It might lack complexity. It might lack what's the word I'm looking for?
It's not a very deep film.
Yeah,
it sets out its world building and its plot points.
Yeah.
It does what it needs to do, but it doesn't really round out things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's kind of like, here's what happens next.
Yeah.
It doesn't let it sit. I mean, it does a lot of sitting, but it doesn't let certain world building aspects sit.
It's not a complex exploration of it. It just it's
blunt.
It's more like a fable.
It's blunt.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that kind of adds to the enjoyment of the film and the kind of hopeful nature of it. Couple more things. The postman's character, Kevin Costner's character, is very different from the mariner, where the mariner was like a Mad Max, like loner, man of few words.
They're both kind of men of few words.
No, I would. No, that's not at all.
You don't think the postman's a kind of a lone wolf kind of guy?
Kev goes from town to town reciting Shakespeare.
Yeah, like the postman. The postman's very verbal. He jokes a lot. He talks to himself. He talks to Bill, the mule.
That's true.
He has sarcastic remarks throughout the film. And he
might not be good at forming relationships like the mariner.
Yeah, like he's a loner in the sense that he drifts from town to town. He doesn't have a sort of stable family or relationship. But yeah, he's different in the sort of the way the mariner is like a stoic, misanthrope. And all I was saying with that is that Kevin Costner's not just playing the same character again.
No, yeah, even though it's
a nameless drifter in a post-apocalyptic world, he didn't just be like, this is the mariner, but on land now.
With guns.
Yeah, it's like the postman
More
character.
guns.
The postman character is a lot different from the mariner character. Just as the world of the postman is a lot different than the world of Waterworld. All right, I think that's it. There's so much more to talk about. There's so much more, but we're really running out of time. And we have to talk about probably the most important thing.
The fact that it's a really good Star Wars movie.
The fact that,
Such a good Star Wars
with
film.
all good movies from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you can just remake them as Star Wars movies and they'd be better than anything in the new Star Wars movies. And The Postman is a prime example of that, where that kind of simplistic view of good versus evil and that kind of
swashbuckling,
and that kind of epic nature of it, but also that like we were just talking about before, about how the movie's about restoring justice and decency and heroism and hope to the world, is what Star Wars originally, the original movies were about.
Yeah, I mean, so Star Wars had the Empire, this film has the wholeness.
Exactly. It's restoring hope to the galaxy. It's restoring
the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, but it's restoring, it's defeating the Empire and restoring the galaxy to how it was before, and restoring peace to the galaxy. Just as this movie, as with a lot of other movies, but we're just talking about this one, The Postman's about, bringing order back to chaos and restarting America with a fresh slate and defeating the evil cultist or clan.
With Star Wars, Luke kind of, at the end of Last Jedi, he kind of rediscovers what it means to be in the fight again.
Yeah.
Even
though it's poorly done, yeah.
Yeah. But in the Postman, he isn't really interested until he begins to read letters. And then there's a scene where he's in the back of the van.
Yeah.
And he's just reading letters from people.
Yeah.
And he finds it engaging. It moves him.
He reads about like little Jimmy lost his tooth, and then he finds the tooth in the letter, and that changes his sort of.
He sees how good it is.
Yeah. And that's what's missing from the new Star Wars movies, and that's why Last Jedi failed at what it was trying to do with Luke. Luke is just cynical, stands around the island for 2.5 hours of the film, and then at the end decides to force project himself
to death.
To distract the enemy who Finn and the others were already distracting, and then fights himself to death. It is the worst. And we were talking about how the Postman, just like last week, where the Mariner is a better stand-in for Luke than the Last Jedi Luke is.
This is a prime example.
The Postman is also a prime example. It's someone going from town to town, is not really sure about his mission, is not really doesn't really believe in himself, but because of other people believing in him and believing in his message, he becomes that hero that people think he is.
Like in this one, for instance, he goes to a town and he gets a Padawan named Ford.
Yeah.
And then he goes away again because he's still, unsure about his ideals. And then he comes back later on and Ford has his own Jedi school.
So you can easily, like I said with Waterworld, you can easily remake Last Jedi as a better movie using the Postman as a template. Luke starts his Jedi school, Kylo Ren destroys it or whatever and turns to the dark side or whatever. Luke and his few remaining students, Luke is completely distraught and leaves and exiles himself or leaves to discover something about the Jedi, whatever. It comes back and his pupils, who in the Postman is Ford, and I guess in the new movies would be some sort of Rey-like character, they're the ones who have actually taken the Jedi code and the Jedi way of life and instilled that in the galaxy and return hope. Yeah. And that restores Luke's faith. And he becomes a fighter again and he decides to take up the mantle of and lead again. What's
so great about this conversation in relation to the Postman is that when he returns and he sees how inherently good the couriers are, he's like, this is like... And even though he was never a real courier... He's like, this is what it means to be a postman.
Exactly.
I know how cheesy this must sound to those listening at home.
But like, it's kind of like, it kind of fits Star Wars.
Yeah, you know? it's a Star Wars movie. Yeah. It's just in the way, it's just a Western in America.
That kind of good.
And they've got delivery.
Star Wars is a good versus evil morality play. And the new movies are trying to be darker and more complex, but they fail in every respect. And I think simplifying it and just bringing it back to that good versus evil morality play, you can still have character development and drama and interpersonal conflict and inner conflict.
I think maybe Disney should hire Kevin Costner.
Oh God,
I'm only joking. Don't worry.
I don't know about that. There'll be too many creepy sex scenes.
Not in the Me Too era.
I don't think it'd work.
But yeah, like taking it further, even the sort of the delivery routes can be like the galactic trade routes.
Yeah, and like the way this movie unfolds because it's so long and slow, and how he's traveling to different towns, and it's like, well, that's the way you travel throughout the galaxy. There's different planets and
outposts.
Instead of different settlements, there's different peoples and races.
And there's that scene where Ford and the other courier get captured, and they're not going to bow down because they're couriers.
Yeah, and I like how that scene where Ford and the other post kid,
and he's from California. They don't know each other.
They haven't gotten out that far yet. So it's like their message has reached so far and has started
like
its own. Yeah, and that's kind of what
Star Wars is all about.
Exactly. It's like it's restoring hope and peace to the galaxy. There's that scene where they get to Bridge City, and
Tom Petty's a Jedi anyway. Or was a Jedi anyway.
Yeah. Tom Petty's the real Jedi Master. And all the townspeople gather, and they're like, what's going on? And Tom Petty's they don't call him Tom Petty in the movie. They just imply that it's he used to be a famous guy, but he's the mayor of this city, and he's like, calm down, everyone, everything's going to be okay. And then someone's like, oh, to Kevin Costner, you're the postman, like, aren't you? And everyone's like, wow, the postman's this kind of real, this
hero figure.
Exactly. And a little kid in the crowd says, what's a postman? And the crowd kind of parts, and the little kid's just staring at Kevin Costner. And then one of the other, apprentice post service people,
couriers,
pulls out his postman's cap and hands it to Kevin Costner, and then that's when he decides to retake up the mantle of the postman.
Handing him his lightsaber.
And we were joking. We were watching the movie, joking that could be the moment where Rey or Rey-esque character pulls out Luke's old lightsaber and says, "Here, like, take up your mantle as the leader we need you to be."
Oh man, this is a movie that I feel like I want to see again
Disney,
and again.
Why are you not paying us billions of dollars right now?
Like we would take this movie...
P.O. Box. I'll give you the address. We're at Northwest FM Studios now.
You can also reach us at Tuesday with UAU.
Yes, exactly.
Just slap this movie with a science fiction kind of
writes
pen.
itself.
It does.
The Holnists are this clan of, they're about ethnic purity, they're about feudal sort of
warlike.
warlike. Yeah, they could be the sort of Knights of Ren or whatever the hell they were trying to do in the new Star Wars movies, which we still haven't seen yet.
Well, the Knights of Ren, they're not, they're not going to be in any of the movies. I don't know why he brought them up. They don't exist.
It's the last movie, and they have to introduce the Knights of Ren.
Anyway, $10 says they won't introduce them at all. They'll forget about them completely.
Oh God, this is going to be such a disaster. But anyway, what was I saying? The wholeness. They're the bad guys. Let's say they're the Knights of Ren. Let's say they're the bad.
They're the Empire.
Let's say they're the Sith. Whatever. Just for start to slap on that Star Wars a name for it. And when at the end of the Postman, when the Postman challenges General Bethlehem to single combat, defeats him, and becomes the leader of the Wholenists, he then changes the 8th law, which used to be the only penalty is death. And he changes it to
there will be peace.
Yeah, no more killing. There will only be peace. And he kind of introduces the Wholenists into the Postal Service and the rest of society and integrates them.
Some of the Wholenists not bad.
And all the Wholenists who were kind of under General Bethlehem's thumb were like, oh yeah, cool, peace. Okay. And everyone's like nodding along like, yeah, peace. It's very cheesy, but it's cool. So, and that's kind of what could have happened in the new Star Wars movies, where let's call him Kylo Ren, just for the sake of it, so people know what I'm talking about. Kylo Ren plays the General Bethlehem role, where he's kind of left Luke's, he's turned his back on Luke's teaching. He started his own Knights of Ren or whatever. He started his own warlike clan. He wants to be more like, he doesn't even necessarily have to be like the Sith. It can be more like Grey Jedi. Not like good Jedi, not like dark Jedi, just Jedi who have their own way of thinking, who have their own system that are against everything that everyone else's system.
But it's also the Sith way of thinking is they have the power. It's like they're going to use it.
But it doesn't to make it different from all the other Star Wars stuff that has come out. You can sort of maybe make it a bit more complex in the sense that they're not Sith, they're not good Jedi, but they're not Sith.
Necessarily. What I meant by that is like that sort of idea that it's like they wield the power so they can take what they want.
Exactly. So, in this sense, it'd be great. Luke comes, he defeats Kylo Ren, and the Grey Jedi are like, oh, we understand, there has to be peace, and they kind of rejoin the Jedi, and Luke and his school and Rey or whoever the character may be, and they all introduce each other, they integrate and they make the world, they make the galaxy a better place. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, just kind of rapid fired because we're like right at the end of the show, but
it could have been a really good Star Wars
exactly. movie. It writes itself as we keep, it's like we say it as a joke, but it's also kind of true.
Look, the thing is, movies like this show that these stories exist. They've been told hundreds of times before.
Exactly.
There's no reason we can't tell them now. Because this general story does not get old.
That's a good point. Like Star Wars, it's the simple hero's journey. It's Joseph Campbell. It's like, it's good versus evil. Now we're in a time that's politically quite divisive. There's a lot of stuff going on with the environment, with the media, with whatever. And people might be feeling a bit distraught or whatever.
And that infects our movies, though.
Exactly. And movies maybe reflect that. And that's not to say that movies can't still have that hope, can't still have that old world good versus evil mentality. They can still exist. Hopeful, cheesy movies can still exist and can be phenomenally good and can be technically brilliant.
Here's looking at you, Denis, with Dune.
Well, that's different because that's like a very kind of heavy, kind of complex political, feudal system, and you've got, the sand and this and the, this and the empire and all this and that. So that's different. But just talking about the good kind of old school action adventure movies, they don't make them like they used to, and they have a place now, and they need to make a comeback. And the Postman, it's got a lot of faults, a lot of which we didn't even get to, but just technically it's brilliant. It's real fun to watch. It's funny,
and it has a good message.
It has a good message. It's emotionally powerful. the cheese is delicious.
Like, people hate on cheese, man, but at the end of the day,
if it's done well,
it's fine.
Exactly.
All you need to do is stop thinking about it so much. Sit and you just enjoy the
just
movie.
let it happen.
Let it happen to you.
I've always hated people who say turn your brain off and just watch the movie.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, no.
Saying,
just this. I think that's the worst way to watch a movie. But that's not to say a movie has to be so in depth and so complex.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying this movie has a lot for us to think about. I'm saying you should be paying a lot of attention, but I'm saying in terms of cheese only, I'm like, just don't worry about the cheese. Let it wash over you.
Exactly.
It's not going to hurt you.
It's fun. It tastes good.
Sometimes you need sentimental movies, though. Like, sometimes you can appreciate a sentimental movie.
Yeah.
Especially when we have such dark and gritty movies now.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want that kid looking after Kevin Costner as he rides away on his horse.
Just, like, it's beautiful.
And we are out of time.
We're well out of time. Unfortunately, this is the problem with being live on the radio. We just do not have even an iota of time to
Matt's
discuss
not here,
these
so
things.
we're not in trouble yet.
Well, yeah, he hasn't come in for his show yet. So, but yeah, like check the Postman out.
Really good. It delivers.
It puts the post in the post-apocalypse.
That's right. Yeah, like watch Waterworld, watch the Postman. Like
with these two movies, because we're talking about them back to back.
Yeah.
Don't go in there knowing that other people hate it. Like, yes, by now you know other people hate it.
Yeah.
But we quite often say, go in with an open mind. Don't let any preconceived notions weigh you down. Just try and enjoy
That's
it.
the thing, yeah. Like, a lot of movies that garnered a lot of negative press definitely deserved it, and these movies didn't really deserve it. And I think some of it might have to do with, being 20, 25 years old. We can appreciate it more looking back. But even like at the time, like these movies were still really well made. They might not be up there with the greatest of the 90s movies, but they're still really well done. But now looking back on them, it's just, even just the technical side, we just don't see movies like this anymore, and that's really sad. So it's really great to just watch them and enjoy them.
Especially if, like Nathan and myself, you've never seen them before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talk about fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And, like a lot of movies now, it's like they cut, and they're 90 minutes when they come out. It's like, it's refreshing to see, especially a fantasy movie told over a 3-hour period. You can get deep into the world.
Sit in it.
I said last week, I'm like, when's the last time they made a 3-hour post-apocalyptic epic? Like you would never see that in with a mainstream movie star and a big budget and a mainstream release. Never. You'll never see that. I mean, hopefully we'll see that again in the future, but I don't think you'll ever see that.
We're probably more passionate than the average person about movies and film.
Yeah.
But it's like sometimes I like just to sit for 3 hours and just soak it in.
Oh yeah, I love long movies. All my favourite movies are like 3 hours long.
He's hoping Scorsese hits us with a 4.5 hour Netflix.
Oh man, I want the 5-hour full version, not a mini series, a full 5-hour movie.
The gangster cut
that you have to watch in one sitting. So yeah, he's hoping for that. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Like and share the Tuesday Review Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter at Tuesday Review AU. Is that everything?
That's everything.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening.
Adios, cousins.